All right, great. Well, good evening. It's good to see everyone out this evening. It's been quite a while. I haven't been here. Last week we were out of town, and so it's been 3 class sessions, if you count Rodney's in there, that we have not been in 1 John. So we're going to do a little bit of review tonight. I'm going to give you a heads up. I generally don't talk a lot about myself and what's going on, but I am sick tonight. Owen got sick on the cruise, and then gracious enough gave it to me, and so he's over it now, but now I'm starting up, and I'm pretty much like at the top of the roller coaster right now. And so when I go home, it's lights out, and I won't be viewable any longer. But I don't feel great tonight. I've tried to stay off. I've not taken any medicine or anything, so I didn't want to be swimmy headed for this class and other things. So paying the price for that a little bit, but I think it's still better. I did want to ask everyone for a prayer leader, if you guys could find someone to volunteer for that, to do that. Danny, if you don't mind, just in a moment, we'll do a prayer. Turn your Bibles, chapter 3 of 1 John. That's where we're going to be at tonight. We are starting back up. We're going to bump back a verse to verse 10, just because of context as we do that. But let's review for a little bit, figure out where we are again. In chapter 3, we started off with the idea that John reflecting the love of God for us. And he says, see or look what manner of love the Father has for us. And what was the reflection of that love that he said was? See what manner of love the Father has for us. Beginning of chapter 3. In that we can be called children of God. And he didn't just stop there. He went on and he says, and so we are. And so it's really amazing. It's not even that you can't just be called children of God, but he says, and we are children of God. John is very encouraging throughout the book, and he continues to do that as we look at this. And so as he points out that, and then he went on and he started pointing out to us about the behavior and focusing on the qualities of that behavior as we are children of God. And he goes on and he says, in verse 1, he goes on to say, and he says, the reason why the world does not know us is because it did not know him. And why does John say that? This is the start of chapter 3. It just goes into the context of tonight. Why would John say that? The reason the world doesn't know us is because the world didn't know him. What does that mean for us in relation to the world?
We're supposed to be holy as Jesus was holy, and that don't separate us from the world.
It doesn't set right with the world, does it? And it is something that's going to set us apart. Will the world love us for that? No, the world's going to hate you for that. The world hated him. The world won't understand you. The world will abuse you. And the reason for that is because not only are we called children of God, but so we are children of God. We are children of God. And then John starts talking about the qualities from there that make us that make us children of God. And the next few verses are spent discussing righteousness versus what? I'm sorry. Lawlessness, yeah, right. Unrighteousness, sinning, lawlessness. He says that you can't have one or the other. You can't have both, excuse me. He says you can't have both. He says you're either righteous and you're a child of God, or you're unrighteous, or you're lawless and you're a child of the devil or Satan. Right, that's what he says. So he says Christians, in the first chapter, he says Christians don't sin. John says that. Christians don't sin. And as he goes through and describes that, that's not who we are. That's not part of the plan for Christians. It's not what's intended for us to do that. And I wanted to take a moment to talk about that just as we start the class this evening. It's something that I talked about years before and when we taught John the first time. And we brought this up, and this is this idea that Christians don't sin. And if you guys were in that class, Miss Janet reminded me of it, and I'd forgotten about it, but I saw it in my notes. Every class I would open, and I would say, do Christians sin? And the answer I'm looking for is no. But is there another way to answer that? Do Christians sometimes sin? Yes. But what we're getting at is what John's getting at. He's saying because you're children of God, you don't sin. That's the way John is putting it. And the way I tried to bring that up to think about it was the idea that, let's say a scout leader, like a Boy Scout leader, gets up in front of a room full of Boy Scouts. And he makes the statement, he says, Boy Scouts don't lie. Does that mean that if anyone in that room has ever told a lie before, that they're not a Boy Scout? It doesn't, does it? What is he saying? When you go to a group like that and you say, Boy Scouts don't lie, what are you doing? You're setting a standard. You're setting an expectation. If you do this, what does that mean as far as you as a Boy Scout goes? Are you filling the standard that you've set by putting on that uniform, by putting on that name, by putting on that badge? Are you fulfilling that standard? He says, no, you're not, because Boy Scouts don't lie. Christ is saying that to us through John. He's saying to Christians, he says, if you take on the name as a child of God, and so we are, and then you go about sinning, you're going against your purpose. You're going against your label. You're going against that badge that you put on and say, I'm a child of God. And he says, and so we are. So we don't do those things. Those things are not designed in us. They're not part of us, and they shouldn't be part of us. And so as we go, we're going to come back to this question because John's going to bring it up over and over again. He's going to make statements like this that he says, you don't sin. And that's what he means by that. And so we're going to talk about that as we get through the lesson as well tonight in doing that. So now the discussion is coming back around to verse 11. Like I said, we'll start in verse 10. And he's going to talk about this truth that's been with us from the beginning, is what he's going to say. And with that discussion, he's going to intertwine two different subjects that a lot of times we don't intertwine. And that's going to be righteousness and love. He's going to bring those two together and say that one is basically intertwined with the other. And then he's going to make that point. So, Danny, if you'll lead us in a prayer, we'll start in verse 10.
Our God and our Father in heaven, we're so thankful for the time that we have, that we can come together and open your word. We're thankful, Father, that we can come from our lives and our days here and be able to gather with Christians and to know that we have the same purpose, the same goal in our lives. I pray, Father, that you would help each of us to see what you would have us to see, that we will grow in the areas that we can and that we should, and that ultimately we will bring ourselves and others close to you. We ask these things in Christ's name.
Amen. Thank you, Danny. All right. Put this up here real quick. All right, and I need a reader for verses 10 through 12. Like I said, we're backing up a verse, but do that, Rodney. If you don't mind, then I'll get some of the rest of y'all.
This is said that who are the children of God, and whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God, nor is the one who does not love his brother. For this is the message that you have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. We should not be like Cain, who was of the evil one, and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his own deeds were evil and his brother's righteous.
Okay, and as we can see, John is coming back around to this discussion. He hasn't left it, not entirely, but he's coming back around to this discussion of the idea of loving our brethren. And he's bringing this back. And how long has this message been around, he said? From the beginning. You know, this isn't something I've sprung on you, God says, from, just in the New Testament or just since Christ. It's been there since the beginning. And how close to the beginning does he use an example? Pretty close to the beginning, right? Yeah, Cain and Abel, right? He goes all the way back to Cain and Abel and says, I want to start there. I want to start with that example of doing that. And there's always been kind of a lot of debate, and I know we've discussed this here as well. There's always been a lot of debate about Cain and Abel and why Cain's sacrifice wasn't acceptable to God and why Abel's sacrifice was. And we talked about, meat versus agriculture and all that type of thing. What does John say was the reason? Not to discount any of those discussions, but what does John say was the underpinning reason why Cain's sacrifice was not accepted? His deeds were evil. His deeds were evil, right? What he was doing, regardless of the sacrifice part, in other words, does John give the idea that what Cain was doing was everything was right except he brought the wrong thing? That's not the feeling I get. And so what he was saying was he was like, his deeds were evil. And how was that met out? How did we find out how evil Cain's deeds were? Killed his brother, right? And remember, he was angry about it at first. And what did God say to him? Why are you angry? And he says, if you do good, will you not be accepted? He already knew what was in his heart. It wasn't about the sacrifice per se. Like I said, those discussions are not invalid. But I think the point was, God knew Cain's heart, and he says, I didn't accept your sacrifice because you, as Buddy pointed out, you don't love Your deeds are evil. And John's going to intertwine that together. His deeds were evil, therefore he didn't love his brother. He didn't love his brother, therefore his deeds were evil. And they're one and the same as John is covering this, as he's bringing this up. So why does John bring this up? He's already talked about loving our brethren, right? I think I've got it up here. That's right, got to do too. Whoever says he is in the light and hates his brother is still in darkness. Whoever loves his brother abides in the light, and him there is no cause for stumbling. Whoever hates his brother is in the darkness and walks in the, and I didn't copy the rest of that, but yeah. But whoever hates his brother walks in the darkness and walks in the, what's the rest of that verse? Oh, in the darkness. I guess that makes sense. He walks in the darkness and he's in the darkness. Okay, so yeah, he's in the darkness. So he's bringing this back up here, but in a different way. Why is he bringing this back up? Why the extra discussion on this? We've got this, right? We already love our brethren. We know about loving our brethren. Rodney?
Well, I talk about it's very much like Peter. Peter keeps repeating these things. You know, you've got to understand you're going to suffer. You've got to endure that for the glory that's going to follow. He comes around this. You know, if you suffer righteousness' sake, understand Jesus did do it. He says it again. It's this emphasis of how important this is to the Christian life. You've got to get this.
I agree. He's talked about love. He talked about Christ, then he talked about love, right? And then he talked about truth, and now he's back onto this idea of love again. But in a sense, he's never really changed subjects. And I think that's the thing that John wants us to understand, is John is trying to set a stage for us to examine ourselves by. And as he talks about this, and and it's really kind of it's the same discussion of darkness and light, righteousness and unrighteousness that we had in the first chapter. Jen and I were talking about this recently because we have a lot of friends, really fine people who are in the religious world. They're not Christians, but they're in and around the religious world. And one of the things that we were having a discussion recently was there's this kind of divide or a fight in some of these folks, who call it a fight, but there's a disagreement in some of these folks on modesty. And some of them think, well, some people need to dress more modestly, and others said, no, it's, whatever, it can, whatever goes. But what was interesting in the two groups is there's one we identified more with, obviously. They said, hey, we need to teach our young people to be modest, our young ladies and our young men to be modest. And we agreed with their position, but what was interesting is when we got done and we walked away, I said, did you pick up on some of the language on why the idea was to be modest? It had nothing to do with God. It was because they liked it. And I said, here's the thing that John is bringing back, and it just reminded me of our lesson here, and that is the idea that when people, can good things, can righteous, true, and positive and good things happen in the darkness of the world? Do people do good things in the world? Do they righteous things in the world? Yeah, absolutely, they do all those. But what John is pointing out is don't mistake the good things, the righteous things, and the true things that happen in the world as being in the light. They're not by themselves, because the heart, the love of God and the love of your brethren and the love of the truth is not there. Just because you happen to do it doesn't mean that you have the love that's supposed to accompany it. And that's the thing that we were kind of, like I said, reflecting on in doing this. So the perspective that John gives us in 1 John chapter 2, he says basically if you think you're in the light, you hate your brother, you're in darkness and you're blind. But in chapter 3, he says the purpose of loving your brother, what is the relationship that you can sever with that? If you hate your brother, then what relationship do you sever? Remember, we started that relationship in verse 1. Yeah, you can no longer be children of God. In fact, I think that he's going to make the point is you may think you're a child of God, but if you never learn to love your brother, you might want to question that relationship. You might want to consider whether or not that God accepted you the same way that it might have been acceptable to watch Cain and Abel both offer sacrifices to God. And from man's perspective, they probably look great, but God only accepted one of the two. And John's warning to us is, how is your heart doing? You may look good on the outside, but how is your heart doing? And what does it look like on the inside? And what is it that God gets to see? He's even going to reflect on that later in this chapter. He's going to say, what do you see in your heart? What do you think God sees in your heart in doing that? Other comments on this particular part? Okay, Buddy, and then Macy.
Jesus is, and has many examples of this, but one in particular is the Good Samaritan. And the people he lists off as walking by, the person that needs help, are people that should have been good and loving their brother.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, we see that as he's not picking out, the Baal worshipers, things like that. These are people who should have loved God. Macy?
I was going to say that this morning, just by chance, my reading was in John 15, which is like almost like, when I flipped to what our reading was going to be for tonight, it was like the exact same chapter almost, and I think it sheds a lot of light on this concept because John 15 talks about, if you abide in me, this is how you know. It talks about I'm the vine, you're the branches, and then he goes right in and says, the world's going to hate you for this, and it doesn't matter because I've died for the whole world, and so, and then he ends in the same way that this chapter ends, and he says, you're going to be able to, loving your brother is how you're going to reflect and see if you abide in me or not, and then you're going to be able to judge yourself by the Spirit that's going to come, and all that. I thought, wow, that is literally exactly the same.
It is. John, and that's what puts together the idea that John probably wrote these very closely together. His mind was running through these. God knew what he wanted to say to all these folks, and so when he sent them out, they covered these things. But, you bring up an interesting point about that idea about the world hating you. If they hated me, they're going to hate you, and that's the way John started this. And that idea is between this Cain and Abel, I want us to get that attachment. He's attaching those. He's saying you have two brethren. The world hates you because you're Christian. But within brethren, can we have brethren? Can you have a hate in your heart for your brethren and me not notice it? You can hide it. You can hide it. Absolutely, you can hide it. You can keep it deep down in there, and we can have that. That's what John is asking them. He's basically telling them the reason it came out is when the conflict happened, Cain killed Abel. But that didn't start there. That's where it ended. It started in the heart, and he's going to point that out. And so basically what we're going to look at in the next verses is exactly that reasoning that he's going to point out. Other comments on these verses before we move on? All right. 13 through 15. Daniel, can you read those for us?
Do not be surprised, brothers, if the world hates you. You know that we have passed out of death into life because we love the brothers. Whoever does not love abides in death. Everyone who hates his brother is a murderer. You know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him.
Okay, here's a question for you. Would it be fair to say that loving your brother is required for salvation? We don't put it in the 5 steps, I know that, but maybe it's in that be faithful part. I think John is making it very clear here. If you do everything else right, but your heart has hate for your brother, then you need to be worried about where you are before God. You're abiding in death. And bringing up that term murderer, I think, is something that he did not choose lightly doing that. And then the equivalence of Cain in that. And I wanted to bring that up because, as I studied this, this is a section that I prayed a lot about. I read this over and over and over, and I prayed, and I was like, God, what is it you're trying to get across? What is it? Because there's something familiar about this, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And finally, it kind of hit me, probably because I prayed about it. We've had murderers in this congregation before, in our past. And I thought about it, and I thought it hit me like a ton of bricks. So we've had murderers in this congregation, members of this congregation. We didn't know it at the time, but they were here. And they were part of this group. And do you know what they did? And some of you all know very well who these people were and what happened with them. You know what they did? They accused, and they slandered, and they maligned, and they picked, and they whispered, and they tempted, and they pushed, and they prodded in the background, and all along through the pews, and in and out. What does the name Satan mean in Hebrew? Accuser. Yeah, that's what Satan is. That's what he says. He says, you know who the children of the devil are, right? You know how to find them? Find the ones who are making the accusations all the time, doing those types of things. And it's a lot easier in my older age now to see that for what it is. You need to tell that guy he's leading that song wrong. That sounds very innocent on the surface. But that was a comment made to me by one of these murderers. And you know what? Y'all need to get to work doing these things. There's so much that needs to be done. Y'all need to get work doing it. That was another one. And you know what? I just don't think that guy is providing for his family. He's not taking care of the wife. You need to go talk to him. You notice what I'm doing in each of these? Could those be things that are actually things that could be said, that are valid? But what was happening in each of them? What makes them improper?
You would be pitted against someone else.
Yeah. Well, why aren't you going and talking to them about it? I don't want the conflict. I want you to have the conflict. I want you to have the fight. I want you to have the violence. I want you to be in disagreement. I want to sow discord. I want to divide. And you know why? Why is it, for those of you who are older, why is it that people who are murderers want to sow discord amongst others? Just for chaos, maybe, but I don't think that's always it. I think there's a bigger reason.
Passion you up for one thing.
Keeps the finger from pointing here, doesn't it? Every one of them was hiding a dead and death-filled heart. Every one of them. And you know what they're doing now? Every one of them? They have a dead-filled heart somewhere else showing discord and destruction and pain and violence. They're murderers. And that's what John is saying. He says, it might be amongst you. Be aware of murderers. Cain and Abel, it was a little more obvious. There was a rock. But sometimes it's not just a rock. Sometimes it's a little less obvious than that. Being able to do that. Deflection, distraction. They murdered, and when they were found out, they fled the scene like murderers. It's just the truth of it. Denny?
It's really poignant, some of the stuff too, especially when he brings up verse 14, that we pass from death to life. Going back, this is a spiritual word, right?
Yes. No, absolutely. I think that's the point that John's trying to get you to understand, is that he's been so encouraging. He's been so much like, you guys have got this. But here he's saying, you might not have this. You might not have this. I didn't see Clint and then Rodney.
What kind of strikes me in all of this is I think this is maybe one of the few issues that maybe for a lot of people might actually, get more difficult as you get older. A lot of sins and things, people struggle with as you get older, generally you mature, and those things become easier to avoid. I think this is maybe one of the few issues in the Bible that if you let it, can become more difficult as you get older because, as you mature, sometimes, you have less patience for maybe immaturity and things like that. This strikes me more now than it did when I was younger, just because I think it can be. I think it can, if you let it, it can become more difficult as you get older.
If you leave it in your heart, it'll grow. Yeah, that is absolutely truth. It'll grow walls and it'll grow hard, and it will grow in your heart. And as you grow older, it won't get easier like that. Rodney and then Teresa.
I just thought it was interesting. I kept thinking of verse 13's relation to the rest of this. Don't be surprised that the world hates you. It follows that we know we pass from this life because we love brothers. Every doesn't love lives and death. And I kept thinking about that. The contrast is stark. That it is, the world doesn't understand love. And I saw that. And then, of course, then you drop down to verse 16. I'm like, yep, there it is.
Yep.
He goes and says, yeah, that's the problem. If you don't know Jesus, you said good things happen in the darkness, but they're not the light because they don't know Jesus. And that's where we learn true love.
We just quoted out of my notes. Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I think that he's trying to get across, is this idea of don't be fooled into thinking that good things standing by themselves are a replacement for love in the heart and doing what God said, because they're not. Your heart will still be in darkness, even though your outward signs may be good in that. Teresa?
I think we can also convince ourselves that we are doing the right thing for the other person, the other Christian. But I know of an example, and they were keeping track of all the wrong things that
And that's a really great point, because John's going to go on and develop that, exactly that direction, which is now that I've told you to love one another, is that just an exercise to see if you'll do it, like everything else? Let's see if you'll sing without instruments. Let's see if you meet the first day of the week. Oh, good, you check those off. You must be faithful. No, that's not the purpose of loving your brethren. The purpose of loving your brethren is the gift of brethren to love each other. And that's what he's going to get to. And that's exactly what you're saying is, if you love your brother, you're going to act a certain way. You're going to go to them and be able to offer to them a warning. And we're going to get to that as well as we break into that and look at that. And that brings up a good question. Because we do look at love and we try to measure it in and out. And you say, okay, well, John, what's the difference between love in darkness and love in the light? What's the difference? Because, there are a lot of people who love, maybe even love so much and so well that you're a little bit jealous of their ability to love others. I have people like that. They are just such a beacon of love. But here's the deal. Can love in the darkness be sacrificial? Could someone in darkness want to die for their son or daughter or their wife or husband? Yeah, absolutely, they can, right? But here's the deal. Does love in darkness ever have a sacrificial nature that sacrifices outside of their desire to sacrifice? Does that make sense? In other words, the reason they're willing to sacrifice is because there's value. They would not sacrifice themselves for someone they felt was valueless or less than valued. Would you sacrifice yourself for someone who was already dead? It's a silly question, right? Would you say, would you give your life for this person? Oh, they're already dead. Would you give your life for them? Well, no. The darkness doesn't understand that. But what happened in the light with Christ?
He gave his life for every dead person.
He gave it for us while we were dead, while we had no value before him. That is love in the light. That's the difference between light love and dark love. It's not that both don't look good on the outside, but one is what God needs you to have, he needs you to understand. And that's the love that he's trying to get you to see in that as well. God demonstrates his own love for us, that while we were yet sinners, he gave himself for us. Christ died for us, Romans 5:8. We understand that type of love, then you understand what it is to be a Christian and to live in light. Other comments on this section? Okay. And this is what John is going to say next. All right, so the next reader had a couple. I'm sorry, I didn't see who. Mr. King, thank you.
By this we know that he laid down his life, that we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers. But if anyone has the world's good, and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how is God's love by little children? Let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth.
Okay, do you see the imbalance in a sense of what John is comparing here and what he's talking about? What does John say that Christ did for us? He says he died for us, right? And what should we do?
Well, if we're going to be like Christ, we should be willing to do it.
Lay down our lives for our brethren, right? That's what he says, because we're supposed to be like Christ, and we're supposed to be abiding in him and him abiding in us. Then does he draw a line and say, well, then, of course, you don't need to understand love to this level? He says, no, I need you to understand love to this level. So the question is what does he give as an example of how to lay down your life for your brother?
Having a brother in need, you have to do this to fulfill his need. And
Yeah, tell me about this. How does this, we started with Cain and Abel, getting head knocked out in a field somewhere. And now we're down to Christ died for you. Therefore, if you see your brother needs something and you've got it, let him have it. Tell me about this. What is it that John's trying to get us to see? Is that a problem?
can be. It's really a matter of heart. It comes down to having a selfless heart that is developed in God and all that God desires us to be and do versus that self-fulfilling, self-need heart that you spoke about when doing something in the darkness. Sure, you can do something in the darkness. It can be good.
but you're not doing it for the value placed upon the thing, is it? It's not based upon that, Rodney.
You know, I think about the fact that, when we say Jesus laid down his life for us, okay, we always want to go to the death, but the death would have been no value without the life being laid down the whole time for everyone else. And I think that's what he's saying here. We talk, oh, I'd die for you, but, oh, no, I'm not giving you $20. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
There you go. It's
Yeah.
this whole concept of laying down your life would only be of value if you've seen it the whole time of how you live your life.
I think that's what he's getting. He's tying together two things that we don't normally tie together, righteousness and love. Remember that from the very beginning. We started talking about that. He kept intertwining those two all the way to this point. What made Christ's sacrifice to lay down his life for us worth anything? His righteousness. How is it that you're going to help your brother or sister in need? You can give them the $20. Does that mean you're righteous? Nope, it doesn't. But what do you see in your heart? You close what? You close your heart against them. You might even give them the $20, but you close your heart against them. Brethren, he's calling on us to have things at a different level, a different understanding of love and what it means, to understand love in the light. And that, Danny?
This reminds me of Deuteronomy chapter 15. On some of this, we're talking about sabbatical years and stuff, and poor brethren and that kind of thing. But they said, you have an unworthy thought by hardening your heart, by closing your hand. And
Oh.
it says, so I command you to open your hand.
Open it.
But I think, closing your heart against them, it's back then that was the thing. It was, how are you hardening your heart and closing your hand to your brother?
I think so. I think that this is what the teaching is here. And I wanted to, I'm just going to mention to you guys, like, we have 4 kids in our house. And when the 4th one came, surprise, it's a maple, things become cacophonous a lot of times. And you guys, you have children, a lot of you understand these things, but you're driving down the road and there's times where I just tell everyone in the car, these are my words, don't interact. Don't even talk to each other, look out the window. But the point is that obviously the kids get at each other, the brothers and the sisters, and they have conflicts and all that. But at the end of the day, especially with my olders, but I also talk to the youngers about this, and that is I sit down with them and I tell them, when I tell you to treat your brother or your sister right, it's not just because I do want peace. I want quiet sometimes. That's given. But it's not just because that. It's because when your mother and I are gone, and you guys have something valuable between you. You have a brother and sister that you have a relationship with, that you've built love with, that you have trust with, that will come to you and tell you, you're doing this wrong. And they're going to hold you up, and they're going to hold you to the standard of God because they love you, and they love you enough to say something about it, like Teresa said. And that's where this comes to full circle. They love you enough to say something about it then because they know you'll listen, and you can have a safeguard there. God didn't do this as a checklist again. What do I want for my children? I want that. What does God want for his children? He wants that. He wants brethren that will stand up for one another and have a heart that won't close against each other. It's a lot easier to not say something when you see your brother sinning than it is to say something and cause discord. But you know what will cause you to overcome that? Love. Love, you say, I can't not say this. I can't not talk to you. I can't not embrace you and tell you, let's get this back together again. And I can't not trust you to do the same for me. I will. I will trust you to do the same for me. And I think that's what John's getting at. And in order to do that, you've got to be righteous. You've got to have something there to offer that is that part of that. And I brought this up earlier when he says, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and truth. And I want to repeat it with maybe one change. And I said, we looked at this earlier because of 1 John 2:10, but I wanted to bring it back up and say, if a year went by, and in this year there was a spreadsheet kept for you, for each of your brethren had a column, and every time that you showed love to each of your brethren at this congregation, there was a check mark, and you tallied it, words and talk don't count. How are you doing today? Doesn't count. Are you doing all right? Doesn't count. How many of your brethren would have any check marks in their columns? Of all of our brethren. Are there some brethren that would be empty? Some more full? Our favorites? Some that we're closer to that we do more for? Some that are less desirable to do things for that we see? What if we included back words? Would there still be people with columns that were empty? John said words don't count. I have to look at myself. John is asking us to look at ourselves when we look at that example and say, am I doing what I need to do to fulfill this, to lay down my life for my brethren? And I'm just going to leave that there for you. Unless you'll have some comments, feel free. But that's what I wanted to interject for us. John equates inaction and closing up your heart to murder for your brethren. That's what John says. We've had murderers here before. And I'm not saying if we haven't checked on our brother or sister sometimes we're murderers. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying in the heart, a closed up heart, that's where it starts. And it doesn't take too long to get down a bad road. Okay, other comments on this? All right, we're moving on. 19 through 22, another reader for me. You can do that. Jordan, thank you.
By this we shall know that we are the truth, and be sure our heart before him. Whenever our heart condemns us, God is greater than our heart, and knows everything. Beloved, our heart does not condemn us. We have confidence with God. Whenever we ask, we receive from him.
Okay, so what's your take on these verses? I'm going to throw these ones back at you, just raw. Read it and tell me, what is it that he's saying? Start with verse 19. By this we shall know that we have the truth and reassure our heart before him. What's the by this? Let me prompt it a little bit. If we don't close up our heart to our brethren, right? If we do what we're supposed to do, if we lay down our life for the brethren, by this we shall know that we are of truth and reassure our heart before him, okay? Whenever our heart condemns us, God is greater than our heart and he knows everything. What does that mean? Clint? Or should I do Tricia first? That's it. Okay.
The way I read it was, if our own heart condemns us, then God is far above and beyond.
I think it's that simple. Yeah. I think what he's saying is folks, you know whether this is true or not in your heart. You know it. And I pray, and a lot of times when I pray, I'll say to God, you know my heart. I say that to remind myself that I don't have to explain everything. But God does know our heart. And if your own heart is looking at this lesson and going, I have this reason, I have this excuse, I have this other reason, and I'm not doing these things, then John is saying to you, you already know what you need to do. Then you think God doesn't know? Just get to work. Just get to work on it. It doesn't have to be this way in doing that. If our heart does not condemn us, we have confidence before God. And whatever we ask, we receive from him because we keep his commandments and do what pleases him. Seems pretty simple. Tom?
Just like you were talking about, Art, we're going to be judged by the God who is going to judge us for every thought and intent of the heart. And that's where everything comes from that we do.
It's all of it, isn't it? That's all of it. Yes, Macy.
That's kind of a question to see what you would say, but I keep kind of thinking, because I like the concept of how it's pointed out this whole time, that good things happen in the dark, and really only we know where our actions come from, because, are they really righteous, or are we just trying to put on, and God's going to know our heart and judge us? So how do you reconcile that with passages that say, like, you shall know them by their fruit and things like that, like other Christians? I mean, I know both have to be true, but like, what would you just comment on that?
Yeah, I would say, John talks about that. He says the fruits of righteousness and the fruits of the light are righteousness. That's how you know. He says you can tell when someone is or isn't. But what he's getting to here is he's saying, well, that tells us to some extent, but you need to do your own inspection, I think is what he's saying. We can't do that inspection for one another, obviously. But I think what he's getting to is, if you've got the outside, that's great. Fix the inside. Make sure that it matches. And I think that's what John is getting at. There's really, and like I said, we've had murderers. The inside became clear after a while. And we could see the inside, and we realized, oh boy, we've got a murderer in our midst. And but until that time, it really is up to that person. And I think that's what John is trying to get us to see here in this. Yeah, that's a really good observation too in that. There's been it's been probably close to a year now, but I remember an instance where we were at salt camp, and Robert was there. Now Robert's not here tonight, but he's not out here at least. But Robert was there, and I was there, and I had done a talk at the camp. And Robert came up to me and said something really nice. It was really positive. He goes, "That was really good." He said, "I really enjoyed that." And you guys know me, right? I make really off-the-cuff comments, and I just kind of goofy, and I banter. And I said something to the effect of him of like, "Wow, you need to get a hobby or something." Like if that entertained you, I'm trying to put myself down. And he was like, "Oh, okay," and he walked off. And I didn't really know Robert that well then. And ever since that time when I did that, up until that next Sunday, because he left that night, from that time all the way to that Sunday, that ate away at my heart. Because I made that comment and I thought, I wonder if that offended him. And I wonder if that bothered him. And I waited in the foyer that Sunday. When he walked in, I was like, "Robert, come here." And I talked to him. And of course, now I know Robert well enough, and y'all know Robert, of course. And I said, when I said that, I said, I didn't want it. And he was like, "No, I thought it was hilarious." And he thought it was great, but it ate at my heart. And I thought about that, and I thought, that's the way we should be with our brethren all the time. We should always be guarding, what it is that we outwardly do. And if we have something that we think maybe has offended our brother, or that we're holding against them, or they're holding against us, we should be waiting in the foyer, waiting for the opportunity to talk to them face to face and to solve it. Because that's something that, it is just, your heart can condemn you. My heart had a grip on me. I didn't sleep well for like 3 days until I was able to talk to him. And that's something that I think that is something that we need to have. We need to love our brethren and have a guilt-free heart, is what John's saying. And he says, then you'll unburden your heart if you just do what's right and take care of those things and do that. If sin weigh on your heart, then get rid of it. Get rid of that and release it, like Danny said. Open your hand, let go of it. Okay, final verses here, 23 through 24. Get a reader for these? Is that Johnny? Thank you.
This is his commandment, that we believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another, just as he has commanded us. Whoever keeps his commandments abides in God, and God in him. And by this we know that he abides in us, by the Spirit whom he has given us.
Okay. John kind of wraps up. He was like, basically, here's the commandment. Here's the final comment on it. That we believe in the name of our Son Jesus, of the Son Jesus Christ, his Son, and love one another just as he commanded us. He wraps up the three things that we've been talking about: love, truth, back to love, combined with righteousness. He says, there it is. You got to follow the commandments. You've got to love, and you've got to believe in him, which is the righteousness part of that. Just as he commanded us, whoever keeps his commandments abides in God, God in him. If we spend our time, here's the thing that I think John is pointing out to. If we spend our time spiritually trying to figure out ways to explain why we're not quite meeting the standard that John sets, if that's how we spend our time, excuse our behavior, our works, our heart, we try to reassure ourselves, then I think that this is the evidence that John's alluding to. But if you spend your time in confidence, your heart reassured, because you look at what you're doing and you say, I'm so glad God taught me this, that I can live in light, then I think what he's doing is he's telling you, be encouraged, be strengthened by that, and know that you're walking in the light and that you abide in him, and the Spirit whom he has given us abides in you. And that's his encouragement to you. All right. Sunday, we're going to be in 1 John again, chapter 4, and I'll send you the reading list at that time. I appreciate all the comments and all the help. And Danny, we've got a video going, so I'll remind you of that. Thank you. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.